You're listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. I started this podcast to learn what makes people resilient after challenging events and how they've used those series of events as a catalyst for change in their life. You'll hear stories of resiliency and strength, so get ready, sit back, and be prepared to be inspired. Today, my guest is Mika Domingo. After leaving the Philippines during the Ferdinand Marcos regime in the early 1980s to seek better opportunities in America, Mika's family not only navigated unfamiliar surroundings, but assimilated in the American culture, and they also thrived. The family's incredible work ethic and sound financial sense allowed for the creation of many opportunities for others, including financial support for individuals going to college, the creation of dozens of jobs through an international bookkeeping company. They provided services to help underprivileged communities and also built rental property buildings for the family's future. Mika's mom's struggle with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's created challenges and opportunities for the family to become even more resilient and continue her legacy. This is the story of family resilience, triumph over adversity, and service to others. So, Mika, thank you for joining me on my podcast, A Catalyst for Change, Stories of Resiliency. I'm so happy that you came on to share your story.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I've read a little bit about you, but can you give us and our listeners more information about your background and your story?
So, I am an attorney and also an adjunct professor, and I am from the Philippines. My parents, the whole family, my older sister and older brother, and I were all born in the Philippines. And my parents came to America in the early 80s.
Okay.
We lived a very comfortable life back home, but there were things we needed to do. So we moved here eventually.
Wow. So you moved here. And how old were you when you moved here?
I was 12.
Okay. So you came here as a child, still in grade school. And can you tell me about what that experience was like? And that must have been a big change for you.
It was a change, quite the change to learn how to navigate through this new environment. We lived a very comfortable life back home. Mom was a university professor and CPA, and dad was a police officer, and they were both entrepreneurial. So they were involved in small business ventures, and life was good. As I remember growing up in the Philippines, life was flourishing for us. We were surrounded by a lot of comforts. We had nannies, a couple of drivers, a cook, and even tutors because mommy wanted to make sure that we were always on top of our schoolwork. Yeah, and my siblings and I even had voice coaches, piano teachers, dance lessons, swimming lessons. I also had theater and every possible lesson I could think of. But I was a bit young at that time when the political scene in the early 80s was tumultuous with the re-election of Ferdinand Marcos, who was known for imposing martial law.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
his years, you probably have heard about a little bit about the history. So those years when he was in power, when I was little, those years were marred by corruption, economic stagnation, and this steady widening of economic inequalities between the rich and poor. So even though we were comfortable, my mom and dad envisioned a better life in America. Some of their siblings had already immigrated to America and they wanted to follow suit. So mom and dad first moved to Wilmington, Delaware, because mommy's sister, who was a teacher, and her husband, who was a doctor, they had already established their careers and were very successful. So mom and dad came here. That first year, my siblings and I stayed put in Manila because mom and dad wanted to sort of, get settled, right?
Yeah.
So while we continued to enjoy those usual comforts, mom and dad had to adapt to this environment and eventually assimilate to some culture. Luckily, since the language of instruction in the Philippines is English, and English is spoken in almost every industry there. I always spoke English, both English and Tagalog growing up. They didn't have any language barriers to deal with when they came here, but they did have the usual challenges of building new connections and finding jobs that suit their education and experience. I remember hearing about my parents juggling several jobs in the beginning, which was a huge difference from their lives in Manila. They managed a video store and even catered food while they held full-time jobs. They just worked very hard. Mommy first worked as a bookkeeper, and dad was in security. And later on, when mom took the CPA exam in California, she ranked in the top 10% and landed her first CPA job. I remember my dad also doing, some property management and even sale for a pots and pan company.
Anything they could do, right?
Exactly. And he was a great cook, so it kind of made sense.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a wonderful, they were so resilient to have known when they needed to leave the Philippines and what was safe for the family, being able to come to America, establish those connections, and take the exams, the CPA exam, graduate top 10%. That's amazing. So it's such a tough exam from what I've heard. So that's amazing.
Yes, my mom was a professor at the university when she was working as a CPA in the Philippines. And so she tended to do really well on exams. She also mentored a lot of CPAs in California throughout her careers. So she worked very hard. She actually worked 7 days a week. She only took breaks when we went on trip.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a very hardworking person.
So they've taught you a lot about resiliency just from their story, from watching them live their lives the way they did.
Yes, they taught us how to work hard and be patient with anything that we were doing for the first time, because there are quite a few things, living in a new environment that we were exposed to. I remember that first year in America, in California, we were living in an in-law because mommy wanted to save money that year so we could buy our first house. And that we did. Eventually we built these mommy built these buildings, or the family did. So we have several now, but this was from nothing, from coming here with just their education and their determination. At the time when we came here, we only had one car for the family. Again, it was a huge difference from what we had in Manila, where we were used to having several cars and motorcycles. My brother had two when he was in high school, and a couple of our own drivers. But my mom was very organized. She was very proactive. As soon as I got here, I immediately took my first placement exam at a public school, and that was before I moved to a private school in San Francisco, and due to my high scores, I skipped 2 grades. My older sister, who is now an accountant, my older sister, Lynn, she's an accountant for Contra Costa Sheriff's Department, and my brother, Arnold, who is now a deputy sheriff for one of the counties in the Bay Area. While I was going to school, they got right to work. They too juggled several jobs initially.
Yeah.
They worked very hard.
So the whole family moved over here. So you had aunts and uncles that were already here. You stayed in Delaware for a little while. And then when she got her CPA in California, then you guys moved here and stayed in that in-law until you could afford to buy the family home. How many of you came when you came from the Philippines?
So my mom and dad were the only ones who lived in Delaware, and then they moved to California. And that's when my siblings and my sister Lynn, brother Arnold, and I moved to California to get reunited with my parents. So a total of 5, but there were already families in America. The sister in Delaware and my dad also had siblings already in California. So they were very comfortable moving from Wilmington, Delaware to California because, we had family. Even my mom's siblings, a few of them were educated in America. So, it was always, we had some guidance.
Yeah, it
Yes.
sounds like so how did that time that you spent in the early days being 12 and trying to get adjusted to a new life in America, how did that build resiliency and make you who you are today?
So as a child, every time I tried something new and the outcome was, let's say it was a challenging experience or outcome was not what I wanted. So some would say failure, right?
Mm.
My mom would have a conversation with me, right? And she would ask me, what did you learn? How can you use what you learned to be better? My early experience of moving to a new environment, moving to a new school where I was ridiculed because I had an accent. And even though I spoke English,
Yeah.
I had an accent. And then later on, finding out that I was doing so well that I was at the top of my class. Those years were very important years because those years taught me the importance of being able to frame the hardships as learning experience.
Yeah. And to look at them a different way. So it changed your mindset. So it helped establish you as a positive person, looking at things as growth opportunities and ways to become better. It sounds like.
Yes, I had a very good mentor, and that was my mom, and also my big sister and my brother. They have really strong personalities. And so I have that, I'm surrounded by that family strength and resilience, and they're always so practical. Mommy would always encourage us whenever anybody whined, okay, so you just wasted 5 minutes of your time whining. What are you going to do now?
Yeah. Yeah, so get it out of your system and move forward. See it as a blessing, as a learning experience. I love that. Yeah, and it sounds like she was really into building herself up and then building others up. Can you tell me a little bit about that work ethic and that value that she instilled in you to help
Yes.
others?
Yes, my mom in the 90s, so she worked for several companies. And after doing that, she decided she was going to launch her own international bookkeeping company. She had experience working for a big German company when we were in the Philippines, other companies here when we moved, but she was entrepreneurial. So she started his own bookkeeping company with her main office in Berkeley, California. And she and her business partner built a 24-hour practice with 3 shifts. So it's crazy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so literally 3 different shifts. And at its peak, they had almost 80 employees. She was very successful. I am convinced my mom was a superhuman because I didn't see her resting. I mean, she did rest when we were traveling, when we were on the plane, or sometimes on the weekends she would take naps and then she would take breaks to have dinner with us, but she would always go right back to work because there were a lot of things to do. And so her business was very successful. And during those years, mom and dad, because they were very much interested in, especially my mom, in saving money, they started focusing on investing in rental properties. So mommy wanted to have not just investment in stock and bonds for us. So our Christmas and birthday presents were oftentimes stock certificates. Yeah, and I would always ask. I remember when I was little, I would get money, for example, and I would ask, well, where's my Barbie doll? But then it was always, okay, let's see, that would be a reward if you did well in school and you would get an extra gift or something. But growing up, we always had our own CD, our own savings account. Whenever we received gifts from others, a percentage of those gifts would go towards the account. So yeah, my mom wanted to have these income generating properties. So eventually they built these buildings, and now we still have them. Since my mom has passed, she passed away from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's in 2017. But we have this corporation, and the family's continuing to sort of manage these buildings, and their income generating for us.
Oh, that's what wonderful foresight. And that's so nice that she was thinking ahead. She really instilled those values of, saving money, your future, making sure that you had enough to survive. And that's just a wonderful value to instill in a child coming from tough times, which made them move from the Philippines, reestablishing themselves, and then bringing all of those values that they learned to their children. And you mentioned that she mentored people in being a CPA, and she was helping other people in the community. Now, was that family, or was that other, scholarship fund or something like that?
Yes, so not just family, but there were quite a few individuals that she met through her work, or even through her association. She belonged to quite a few associations. She was president of one or two of them. And so she mentored individuals who were preparing for the CPA exam, and even those who have taken the CPA exam and passed, but they were looking at hours. So I think they're required to complete a certain number of hours. So she helped them out, because it was sort of what was in her nature, is to just help out, not just those she met through the association, but also sometimes family members who are coming to America. And as far as, any scholarships, they did have these funds. My mom participated in a lot of fundraising events. I remember mommy collecting funds to purchase encyclopedias so that they could donate encyclopedias to the schools and the libraries. She was so active. She was such a hard worker, and she instilled that in us, the importance of hard work and a good financial sense. And as you pointed out, those were really important, and helped us build what we have today. So she had scholarships available for high school students, for example, and then she had extra funds available for other people who need help to continue their college education. I do remember that she had maybe at least 7 individuals that she supported throughout their college education. And then a lot of them now are successful, CPAs or police officers or entrepreneurs. She was just quite this
Powerhouse.
the force.
Yeah, it sounds like.
And she was so practical too, because she just didn't want to waste anything. And she, I remember this story that she told us about her and her siblings. My mom always wanted to be a lawyer, but because 2 of her older siblings had studied accounting, and her mom wanted to make sure that the books were recycled, so she took up accounting instead.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. It sounds like she was an amazing person, and she gave back a whole lot of things to her community. Now, you mentioned that she had Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Can you tell me about those challenges that you had as a family helping her through that time?
Yes, so my mom had Alzheimer's. We didn't know it was Alzheimer's at first. I do remember there was a trigger, or there was this big change when we went on a trip to New York, and my mom had a stroke. So I think it was around 2002 or 2003. She was hospitalized for several days, and then when we came back to California, she still wanted to work. She wasted no time and got back to work and continued to keep that very rigid schedule. She worked about 16 to 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and only took breaks when we asked her out for Japanese food or even when we went on trips. She would work nonstops for weeks so she could just justify taking some time off. And I think it was around 2010 when mommy started exhibiting symptoms of dementia. She had difficulty concentrating and started to become very confused about time, time and place. She'd gone on a trip to Singapore with my dad and got lost at the airport. My dad couldn't find her. I remember I was in law school when mom's memory loss got progressively worse. She would ask me, okay, what are you studying again? And she was just so confused. And so we took this trip to Colorado during that time. I think I was on spring break to visit my cousin and her husband because they at the time they were running this neuro center so that my cousin could conduct some tests. So the results, because we didn't know for sure, right? So the results showed that mommy had Lewy body dementia. It's and I know you're very familiar with this. It's just part of the work that you do. It's the progressive dementia, and it leads to a decline in thinking and reasoning and independent functioning. So this condition, we learned that this condition was going to shorten her lifespan. And we were devastated. None of us could have expected this, right? And this is our mom, our pillar of strength. She runs the show. So it was devastating, but none of us gave up hope. We really wasted no time. We learned as much as we could about this condition, and we reorganized our lives so we could provide assistance. She started to experience slowness, gait imbalance, and other, I guess, our Parkinsonian movement features. And she would, get out of bed in the middle of the night and take a shower with her clothes on and leave her purse in the oven and turn it on. She would leave the house and take out the garbage in the middle of the night. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that Lewy body's Alzheimer's is it's a really challenging disease. That's so good that she had so many people surrounding her with love and support, like you and your siblings and your family, because that's a really tough. How did it progress past that? And how long did she live after she was diagnosed?
So I think we were counting about 7 years that struggle with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So she needed help and more help, but as she got progressively worse. And in America, we didn't have nannies, we didn't have housekeepers. So my dad was the caregiver initially, and my sister, my brother, and I took turns taking care of her. And it was fine in the beginning, but realized we actually need more help, especially when my mom fell off a flight of stairs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was horrible. She was hospitalized again. And we were prepared that she was going to live her remaining days there and years. So my sister was the one really who was in charge of everything, going there 2-3 times a year and making sure that everything was in order with the nurses. She did interviews with the nurses and all the other help that we needed. We really worked as a family, worked together to make sure that mommy was comfortable. And that the business, the properties were being managed. We had accountants who were helping, and we wanted to continue on with her legacy, and that's to keep the rental properties and to continue to save money, because she was always big on saving money for the future. She was also big on giving back. Her main thing was She would always say the quality of our lives was determined by the quality of our contribution. So she was so generous. Even now, as an attorney, sometimes I run into people who knew my mom and they would have stories to share with me. They would tell me, oh, your mom was the one who helped me get my CPA license, or your mom was the one who gave us money when there was a fire and she gave us the money that we needed to rebuild our life, or your mom was the one who taught me how to do XYZ and now I'm a successful business person. So her legacy lives on. You know, she passed away. She was fairly young, but she has us, and we're continuing on with what we do. Both my siblings, they're in public service, and in some sense, I was also in public service. I work for the Attorney General's office, and I do quite a bit of work now. So of course, it was heartbreaking and just very difficult to go through that. But she trained us pretty well. She trained us how to prepare. In some sense, even for her own death. She used to always say, you won't need to worry about money because I help you build what you have so that you can live off of the interest.
Yeah, but she knew that's not what you would do. You would go out and improve others' lives, it sounds like.
Yes, yeah. She was just an incredible person, and it's just so blessed to have her. And I know quite a few people. There were at her funeral over maybe 500 people who came, and these were individuals who came from all over the world. They're not just from America or the Philippines or Germany. They were from all over, people whose lives she touched.
Yeah. And that's amazing that you can still hear stories from people that she has helped and, made their life better. And it wasn't just family she touched, it was the community at large. I really love that she instilled this value of public service into you and your siblings and left this legacy of hope after challenging times, and this legacy of resilience sprinkled throughout her life. It's just amazing. Now, is there anything about your family and the resilience that you all have shown that you think we may not have mentioned? Anything you want to make sure we mention?
I think those are the important ones.
You've been listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. Join us next week for another story of resiliency. And please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and feel free to leave me a comment or email me at catalystforchange20@gmail.com, or on Facebook, we have a page at Catalyst for Change Resiliency.